Good.
So let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Today, first of all, it's thanks to our sponsors, so the Melbourne Xamarin Meetup. Our sponsors are Microsoft for this facility and Melbourne App Development. That's my company for the pizzas. Today's presentation, well, there's two presentations. So Kym, my co-host here, is going to give us a presentation on build, and following that I'll give a presentation on material design. Over to Kym.
That was quick. I was expecting a more exciting introduction. How's everyone doing? Good? Beautiful. Yeah, we can dim the lights. Rod, can you dim the lights? I'm using Rod's computer, so I blame Rod for everything. All right, we're good. Okay, so since the last time we were here at this meetup, Build happened in Seattle between, I think, the 6th and 8th of May. For those of you, was anyone not familiar with Build? No, you're all familiar with it? The developer conference? Developer. So that basically happened, and what I wanted to cover off today is just have a bit of a discussion about some of the announcements and some of the news from there. Now, one of the problems with talking about Build and trying to do a recap of Build, because I do this every year, is that there's this infinite number of sessions there. So you can't possibly watch all the sessions. So that's one problem. The other problem that I have covering this is that often now at Microsoft we do things open source. And so a lot of it is already known about. So, you know, there's kind of these days a little less in the announcement front. But I basically went through all of what I thought would be interesting from a mobile developer perspective, and just sort of got those announcements and giving you links as well to the various talks and just the talks I think that are probably worth having a look at. So I did it so you don't have to. But you know, I think there's well over 300 sessions there. Has anyone been to Build before? No? My dream, one day. One day I'll get to Build. All right, and I actually did this presentation in something which is called, what's it called? Sway. Which is one of the Office products, which I haven't used before. So it's not death by PowerPoint, it's going to be death by Sway. All right, so let's get straight into it, because you know we don't want to spend too long going through these. And if anyone did see any sessions, did anyone watch any sessions? No? What do you people do with your lives? All right. Well then, I was going to say, if you know of any other sessions, let me know. Okay, let's start off with some of the .NET Azure tools announcement, right? Because there was actually a lot of really interesting things here. So my suggestion, your first port of call, and I'm going to give you a link to this exact Sway later on so that you can actually just play the videos straight from here. So don't worry about capturing links or titles or anything like that. Scott Guthrie had a keynote session. His sessions are always great because he's a really good presenter, and also he goes through and just gives a recap of all the top news essentially. And so the things that he sort of covered in this one, IntelliCode, live share, so a lot of Visual Studio 2019 stuff, which was just released. There was a lot of discussion about Azure pipelines. So one of the nice things for those of us who love a bit of CI and CD, you can now define your pipelines in YAML, and you don't actually have to type your YAML, which is awesome because typing YAML sucks. So you can now use a YAML designer. There was, of course, a lot of announcements around AI and cognitive services and machine learning. One of the things that was released was machine learning, or .NET version 1. So what's really nice about that is it really allows people like me, who don't understand anything about AI, to actually bring it into your applications quite easy. So there's like designers for it and things like that. So it's actually really cool, and they have automated ML creation. Now, of course, there was a whole truckload of Azure announcements, new services, things going out of preview into general release. So lots of stuff there. I won't go into those because a lot of those are perhaps not as relevant when we talk from a mobile space, but they probably are from your workspace. Like there's a lot of talk about how all of the databases can now hyperscale, for example. So if you need to take your database and make it heaps bigger, you can do that. But there's heaps of different announcements there. Power Apps. Has anyone seen Power Apps before? Power Platform? Yeah? So from a BI, like Power BI perspective, yeah, it's kind of this way of building apps that allows you to report on things that you have in the BI space. And it's actually really nice. They gave a really good demo of this, and it allows you to build out your apps. I mean, they're not like Xamarin applications. It's got a nice drag and drop editor. It's not like Xamarin Forms, it's got an editor. But it's actually really, really nice. So it's just I thought I'd mention it because if you are ever having to provide a mobile interface for BI stuff, I think it would actually be a pretty good option. But generally speaking, what I'd say is that session there by Scott I don't know what's wrong with your mouse, is definitely worth a go. Have a look at that one. At the very least. Now, after that, the one that I'd have a look at is what we call the two lesser Scotts, Scott Hanselman, so not the Scott Guthrie, the Scott Hanselmans and the Scott Hunter. They gave a really good wrap-up of all the tooling and features around the .NET space. So if you wanted to dive into the first sort of developer-centric sort of keynote almost, this would be one to have a look at. This is pretty demo-heavy, so that's great for us. One of the really cool things they showed there was how you can bring this machine learning straight into a Xamarin application. So they literally, just got a machine learning model and just threw it into a Xamarin app. So definitely, if you're interested in that stuff, have a look at that session. The big focus on that, though, that session was very much that .NET is all about building everywhere, right? So you can build on desktop, web, cloud, mobile, gaming, IoT. AI stuff, and they actually went through all of these different platforms and sort of showed sort of building out an application. The big announcement that came from that one is that version 4.8 of the .NET Framework is going to be the very last version of the .NET Framework, right? After that, what's happening is we've got .NET Core, and we've got Mono and Xamarin, and we've got the .NET Framework, which is separate things. They're all merging together. And so we're basically taking the best bits of .NET Core and Mono and bringing those all in together. So if we have a look at a little bit of a diagram here, which makes it kind of make a little bit more sense. At the moment, there's like 3 stacks for .NET, right? So there's the .NET Framework, which is what you'd see on like your desktop. There's .NET Core, which is most often used in the web sort of space. And then we've got Xamarin and the Mono, right? And so they've got 3 different base class libraries sitting down the bottom here. And of course, what that means is that you've got a slightly different development experience across each of those different platforms. But the good news is, and it also takes the teams more time to actually go and do this, and they have different release cycles, right? So there's lots of problems with this. So after .NET Core 3, what we're going to the next version of .NET, which is called .NET 5, and it just has one base class library to support all of those different platforms. So we're all going to be .NET Core developers, essentially. So that's actually really, really cool. It means your development experience is going to be the same, whether you're building web or desktop or Xamarin applications. So that's really, really cool. So that was probably, I think, was one of the most interesting announcements that happened in that space. So this is the idea then. This is how things are going to look. You're going to have all your different platforms. You're going to have .NET 5. There's just one base class library. And then you're going to have, the .NET Standard's still a thing. That's still how you package things up. But it's all going to have that nice unified feel. So that's actually a really huge thing. And in terms of the schedule for this, This is the map that they drew out, which is pretty cool. .NET Core 3 release candidate in July. .NET Core 3 out in September. 3.1 in November 2019. And then from next year, November 2020, is when we're going to get .NET 5, which is basically when everything's going to come together. And then what they've spec'd out is that there's going to be a yearly release for .NET. Because one of the things that was frustrating a lot of people was that you would get versions of Xamarin or Mono dropping here, and you get versions of .NET Core, and we're up to .NET Core something. And so now it's all going to be every year. We're going to get a new version of .NET. So that's pretty cool. I think it's kind of exciting. Am I the only person who finds that exciting? I might be. They did say minor releases if needed.
So did they mention anything about end of life?
End of life.
So for instance, Core 1.0 is already gone by end of life. It's no longer supported. You have to jump on 2 or 3 to move forward.
I don't know, right? One of the questions they did answer was they were asked about the .NET Framework, right? So like what you'd use in a WinForms application and things like that. What's happening to that? Is that going away? And it's not going away because a lot of infrastructure works on .NET Framework. These LTS ones, and I'm not sure about this, but these LTSs are long-term support. So every second version, they're going to support it for a long period of time. I'm not sure what we actually mean by that when we say LTS. But I would hit up one of the blogs. There's a lot of blogs on what this means. Yeah. But every second version is going to have a long-term support, which means you could park yourself on one of these versions for a long period of time and not have to worry, like as in years. You know what I mean? Yeah. All right, so that was a cool announcement that they had there. So the idea is we have this unified platform, we have our schedule here. Another couple of sessions you might want to have a look at. If you're into C#, C# 8 is coming. It's got lots of awesome features. It has the potential to do away with null reference exceptions, which is awesome, which is what I always get. So if you're interested in what's coming in C# 8 and beyond, come here and click on this link here. There's another Scott Hanselman. Scott Hanselman demos are always great. So that's sort of more about some of the other finer developer things. There is a couple of videos on Visual Studio PC and Visual Studio Mac in terms of what they've been working on and what their next sort of steps are. So definitely recommend those. Then on to Xamarin. So Xamarin sessions, now this is where it gets a little bit difficult because of course everything that we're doing in Xamarin is out in the open, right? So there was a presentation by James Montemagno and Miguel, which gave an overview of where Xamarin is at the moment, and a little bit of history. It turns out it's the 10-year anniversary of .NET on mobiles. How about that? That was unexpected. What I really liked about this presentation, it got a lot of love for the community in here. So Lachlan, who isn't here tonight, he was actually up on the board there. Ryan Davis, who was presenting here last month on AR, one of his slides was up there as well. So that's great. So they talked about where things were. They talked about what's next for Xamarin. They covered off things like the collection view and the visual stuff, which Rod's going to talk about a little bit later. They also talked about the continuous improvements as well that we're seeing in the tooling. So these charts here, let me just quickly zoom in. So the idea with these is this is measuring the build times over different versions for different types of applications. So this is version 15, 18, 15, 19, and 16. So lower is better. So what we're seeing is that initial build times are dropping down. And these are different applications, I should say, as well. So these are different scenarios over 3 different versions, because one of the things that they mentioned is when they started adding new features, they didn't think enough about performance. And so you can see that with some of these, the newer version was actually less performant, but now there's been a very much focus on performance. So initial build times in Android are down. Incremental build times are down, deployment times are down, and sizes are down as well. So this is the install size of Visual Studio. It used to take 23 gig to install Xamarin, which is why nobody wanted to do it. It now takes up 7 gig, which means just most people don't want to do it. So that's good. So continuous improvement in the tools there. And then also they had a discussion about what all this .NET 5 stuff means. So as I mentioned, .NET 5 is for all applications. There's just one BCL implementation, right? Still using .NET Standard, using SDK-style projects, which is actually a really, really good way of going. It's going to support just-in-time, static compilation, or AOT interpreter as well. So I've got all those. And it's also going to have interop with Java, Objective-C, and Swift as well. So that's a good thing for sure. All right, so that was kind of the main bit. That I would watch this session just for that last section where they sort of talk about what that means. Now, there were some other good Xamarin sessions as well. There was one by David Ortenow on the visual design system. Now, Rod's going to talk about this, so I won't go into it. But if you're confused after Rod's talk, have a look at this one because this is kind of the first time I went, oh, I get it, with visual. So this is really good. And he talks about how to even create new visual representations as well, or visual design systems and plug them into Xamarin Forms. So that makes a lot of sense there as well. So the idea there is, with Xamarin Forms now, you can make it look, like a fully native application, or you can make it look like a material application, or you can, potentially, iOS comes along, Microsoft, when they release one, you can plug that in and you can use that consistent styling. But I'll leave that one for Rod to talk about. But the next session that I would recommend having a look at is one by Matt Sukup, who's one of the cloud advocates. And this is all about choosing your backend architecture because it's something that we mostly all have to do at one point, unless you're kind enough to have a bunch of server guys working for you. So in this presentation, he talks about the 3 sort of common approaches, which is, having a traditional web API, so something you might spin up in ASP.NET Core, a serverless backend, so using functions and logic apps and things like that for a service approach, or mobile as a backend as a service type implementations. What are the pros and cons of each of those? And he actually goes and takes an application, he swaps it from one to the other and talks about what's needed in terms of a code perspective. So that's a really good session if you're thinking about how am I going to do my backend. Another cool one was from James Montemagno where he talked about Signal R. Anyone used Signal R before? Yeah, it's super awesome. So the idea of Signal R is that it's essentially opening like a WebSocket, right? So if you have an application that needs real-time updates, so it could be like a chat application, or it could be that perhaps somebody out in the field needs to get the data, needs to be able to see the data changing in real time. And you can't wait for push notifications, or you don't want to poll, right? Signal R solves that problem, and it's super easy to do as well. So James puts together a few applications there in Signal R.
Did he talk about one of the problems with the apps that we write, polling how we're using Signal R to actually receive an application. So we know when there's any changes.
Well, you just connect up. You just basically, when your app, you say, I'm connecting as a client, right? And it will push it to you. You don't poll. The whole idea of this is to get around polling. Yeah, yep. And I think it's got its place. It doesn't get rid of notifications entirely because when your application's not running, you don't have that WebSocket, right? So sometimes you want to bring the person back into your application. But definitely a really cool technology. I think we're going to see a lot more apps use Signal R go forward. There was a good case study on an application called Seeing AI, which you might have seen from some keynotes before at Microsoft. It's an app which helps visually impaired people kind of make sense of the world in terms of I could hold my camera up and it might say, in front of you is an angry group of people watching a presentation or something like that. And this session here sort of goes through how they built that, what the architecture looked like, and a bit of a sales pitch for Visual Studio 2019 and why it was so good. Another session here from James, which was ASP.NET Core Web API, integrating that into Xamarin Mobile applications. Specifically what I liked about this one, it was also with a guy called Glenn Condren, was he talks about how he used the configuration management from ASP.NET Core inside of his Xamarin application. Anyway, it's another interesting session that, and a couple of these sessions are only about 20 minutes long as well. Okay, a couple of other sessions you might be interested in. There's sort of fireside chats, if you like, or some good discussions with the Visual Studio Mac team and also Miguel as well. Okay, cognitive services. Now, I know cognitive services isn't necessarily something that fits into the Xamarin space, but there were a couple of cognitive services which I thought would probably be useful for quite a few mobile developers. One of these is called the Forms Recognizer. This is a pretty cool cognitive service that allows you to take a picture of a form, right, as you would, and it makes sense of it. So it basically uses all AI machine learning and will basically give you that data, but it'll also give you in a JSON format as well. So quite nice.
I love we just use the OCR recognition to create.
Yeah, right. And
It's a bit of work.
yeah, it would have saved you a lot of work. And it's quite cool because it infers or works out things like, hey, there's a table here and here's the row headers and here's the details. So so that's pretty cool, I think. The other one that's I think we could possibly use a little bit in mobile applications is this ink recognizer. What this does, not probably as you would expect, where's my... I'm at too low a resolution to show you the demo. Wait on, let's zoom out, let's see. There we go. So the idea of this is that you can, not surprisingly, take some handwritten stuff and it's going to recognize that. It's going to turn it into text, it's going to recognize shapes. What's nice about it is it returns sort of JSON results about what it's found and where it's found. So the sort of scenario I'm imagining that would be useful, and let's just test it out. Let's see if this will work with my hello. Wow, this is really hard to write with a touchpad. Yay, it worked. Where I think this would be useful is if you were, if you had something you wanted to mark up, and you wanted somebody to go, yeah, there's a thing there and there's a thing over here, right? And you could go, yeah, let's go and analyze that. And it will say, yeah, okay, that's that. And it would give you those points and it would understand what you're drawing there. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting cognitive service as well. All right, there was some GitHub stuff. This is the most interesting thing around GitHub. I'm not sure this was actually technically part of build. I think they just announced it at the same time. GitHub now, well, it's in private beta at the moment, but will allow you to create your packages next to your source code. So you know how, for those of you who publish NuGet packages, you've got your code in GitHub, and then you go and you package them up, and then you go and you log into NuGet under a different thing, and you upload a package and all that sort of stuff. This is going to allow you, because GitHub's going to have a package repository. They're going to have a NuGet, basically, or NuGet compatible. And they're also doing it for NPM and Maven and all these other different packaging formats as well. So it's going to make it a lot easier to be able to have your code checked into GitHub, build up that NuGet right there, and then just have it available. And it also mentions that it works for public packages and private packages as well. So my assumption there would be that if Rod and I were working on something and I was working on a part that was doing a NuGet package that you were consuming, but we haven't got it public, then I could check in my code, it would run a build, it would publish that package, and then you could pick it up from a private package store, which would be really cool. What else we got? You can now log into all the Microsoft services with a GitHub account. So that's what happens when Microsoft buys you. No, that's useful, I guess. App Center. Okay, here's an interesting thing that's happening with App Center. App Center announced 2 services, one called App Center Auth and App Center Data. And the idea is that they're starting off this idea that App Center is moving to a backend as a service, right? So if you have a look at their offerings, there's the dev tools, there's the DevOps parts, but there is now also the mobile backend as a service. So their authentication, so if you want to authenticate your users with B2C, data, if you have data, it's going to connect up to Cosmos DB, and so you can have that, it'll handle all the offline syncing for you and all that. So it'll be a super simple way of integrating data into your application. And they also announced some updates to push notification as well. So the idea then is that, the way I kind of see it is, if you've got a fairly simple application, and the reason I say fairly simple is one of the things I worry about with mobile backends as a service type of solutions is, where you're not building your own backend, is you might outgrow them at some point. That's my fear. But if you've got an application which you don't think is going to grow too much, and you want to, or prototypes, or you just want to get something out there, I think this might be a pretty good option for you, because things like auth and offline syncing and setting up Cosmos databases and all that, it's kind of takes a while. It's hard work. So let App Center do it for you. There's a really good presentation on that one, so go and have a look at that one. The last thing I have is Microsoft Learn. So some of you know I was part of Xamarin University. As part of Build, we announced that we've moved our training from Xamarin University across to the Learn platform. So what we had for the base level certification, that's all now over in Learn. So if you want to get some nice free learning materials for Xamarin, click over on this link here, right? So there's 20 courses in here at the moment. So, consuming REST services, storing data in SQLite, et cetera, et cetera. So basically all the classes that we had for the first level certification, they're all free. We didn't just munge the topics across though. They've all been formatted or redone in the Learn sort of format, which is nice sort of micro lessons. So even though some of these are like an hour long, you can just do it at 10-minute periods and things like that. So that's really good that material's there, and more will come along. And I should just mention Learn as well. It's useful for other things. Like, I don't know, if you deciding that you wanted to have a look at Cosmos DB, for example, right? You could come along here, and it's got training on Cosmos DB. It's got lots of things in here actually. So as you sort of scroll around here, you can see that there's an awful lot. I think we've got 400 modules in there now, including Power Apps in here, Dynamics 365, Power BI, Xamarin's down the bottom there. So lots of stuff, lots of Azure stuff. The cool thing about the Azure stuff is that when you take one of these classes, it spins you up a cloud shell. So it spins you up an Azure instance, if you like, that is completely free. You don't have to put any credit cards in, right? And you can actually play around in Azure and build these elements up and create functions and do whatever you want to do. And then about 4 hours later, we'll just go and kill them all. So there's zero cost in this. You don't have to give it a credit card or anything. So that's a really good option for you if you want to learn some more things. And they're all free. All of them are free. Yep. Absolutely. And so now the Xamarin stuff is free as well. Beautiful. So that sort of brings me to the end of the build updates and things that are build really. Couple of other things, a couple of links in here to go and have a look at. If you want to get the lowdown on all the various announcements, go and have a look at some of these links here. There is links out here to the build website itself. It has all the sessions. There's a YouTube playlist. James Montemagno created a curated list of Xamarin videos as well. Or copy down this link here, okay? And that will give you this presentation, and you can actually go and play any of these presentations through there.
And we'll post it on the...
Yeah, we'll post it on the Meetup for sure. Any questions? Any comments? It's great. It's really, really good. It's really, really good. Yeah, because it's actually part of... I can say that because that's where I work now. No, it gets really, really good reviews. It's excellent material. Yeah.
Some advanced stuff in there?
Yeah, yeah. Primarily what it's sort of focused on, like I said, there's about 400 odd sessions in there, classes I should say, modules. And I'd say it's sort of in the range of beginner to intermediate at the moment. It depends on, basically all the learning from Microsoft is going to start coming in there. All those other divisions who started having different, their own training sites, they're all starting to sort of come in to learn, which is really, really nice. So yeah, it's growing fast. All right, I'm going to hand over to Rod, and you're going to talk to us about Visual.
Talk to you about Visual, and I like Sway. I'm sorry, but my presentation is going to be using PowerPoint. Wrong. Cool. So I'm going to cover material design. See if I can get my mouse to work. Yes. So first of all, a bit of history. So Google develops lots of applications. So they obviously had a problem with every application that had a different team. So they had the problem where their look and feel was different between applications. So they developed a whole bunch of controls, and I think of them like renderers. And in recently, I think it was the end of last year, they made them, middle last year, they made them public under a brand name called Material Design. And it became very, very popular. Xamarin Forms implemented them in 3.6, not very long ago. But the way that they implement them is really quite powerful. On the second point there, I say it's a brand material design. So when I first thought of this, I thought it was some sort of material look and feel, like this sort of material. No, it's just a name. So in Xamarin Forms, we currently have two main ways of formatting our screens. So styles and custom renderers. So this is apart from the structure of the screen. This is actually how we control the look and feel of our actual individual controls like buttons. They've introduced a new one called Visual, and it's an addition to the other two. Which will become more obvious as I go through what Visual means as distinct from styles and renderers. Material design is an implementation of Visual. So it's just one of the ways that you could change your user interface. This will become clear with a demo. So according to that, you can't trust Microsoft. No, I don't want to trust them. I really don't want to trust them. Let me see if I can hide that. So what I've got here is it's a Nexus 6 emulator and an iPhone XR emulator. Now you'll notice on this bit of XAML here, There's nothing unusual. I've got a grid. Oops, sorry. I've got a style in here. Now, normally you would have these in your app.xaml, but for the purpose of the exercise, I've copied it into here. So I've got a round button style, which I'll show you in a moment. And I've created a grid with 7 rows on it and 2 columns. So, and I've got a bunch of commented out stuff that I'll show you progressively. So here I've just put up a button, just an ordinary standard button. And this is how they show on an Android and on an iOS. Now what I'll do is what we try and do is make them similar. So the default is not much use to what we want to do. So we've created, in this example, I've created a rounded button style, which is the one that we've got up here. So I've specified the font, the border, the width. I've obviously put the radius is 16. I've specified a height, padding, margin, blah, blah. You'll notice that they're still quite different. What I can do is I can create a custom renderer. So what a custom renderer does, for those that are not familiar, it allows you to do something specific on iOS or Android. Now, in this particular case, you won't see any difference at all, I don't believe, but it will become clearer. Ah, yes, it is. So you'll notice that on this, so this is just a button. It's a custom button. It's exactly the same as the original button. But what I've done is on Android, I've removed the padding. So the default padding for on an Android is different to that on an iOS. And you'll see that on the very first one, the button, you'll see it's not centered. So this renderer says it's not centered because there's actually padding there. So my custom render, all it does is set the padding to 0 on a Android device only. And that gets rid of that problem. Now I'll show you a default view on material design. So this is an ordinary button, and I've specified visual equals material, which I'll explain in a moment. So what you'll notice is that, first of all, the default behavior of an Android was always capitalized, where it wasn't on an iOS. So you'll notice that these buttons are effectively the same. So the difference in size is because I've scaled the phones, the emulators differently, but by default, all I've done is said put up a button and make it material. What we can do is add a style to that. I might not like that. I might want to make it a round button. And it's actually completely overwritten. Oh, yeah, that was silly, because I've actually said here, define the background color as silver, and it's gone to silver. The thing about these buttons is it's not just the look and feel, but when you click them, so if I click this one, see how they behave? And when you go on material, so on both iOS and Android, they act the same. So they look the same and they act the same. Now, one of the things that the materials designer's got is this shading on the bottom of the button, and that's actually there on that one. Now, the last example I've got, so my point here was that this style sits on top of the material design. So it overrides material. So we've got a hierarchy here. The bottom is material, then we've got styles, and this one I've put the custom renderer with material and a style, and it's effectively it's removed, the renderers remove the padding. On iOS, they're both, iOS and Android, they're both capitals. Now, yep.
Does the last one, when you tap on it, does it have the material?
Yes, material behavior. Yes, because I haven't changed the behavior. All I've done is change the look and feel. So I could, if I get rid of, get rid of that one maybe. Let's see what that looks like. So I could gradually get rid of all of these so it becomes closer and closer to the material. Maybe I'll get rid of that one. Get the idea? Border color. Now go back to the presentation. Oh, actually, no, I'll come back to the demo. So this is, obviously with the button example, it's quite simple. I'm going to go to another screen, which is a data entry screen. So I'll go across here, data entry, and here. Now, this is a mock-up, but what we were trying to do is use styles to get the similar look and feel across the two platforms, iOS and Android. And, you know, we didn't do too badly. You can see that the iOS has actually got borders around the the entry fields, whereas here it uses the standard Android. We probably could have done better there. And I can see there's a bit of a problem with the sizing of the buttons down the bottom. But, you know, if you take away any styles, they don't even compare. Now, how I've done that is, again, I've created all of these styles. I put them in the XAML for the page just for the demonstration. But normally these would be in my app.xaml, so I've set the brand color and the brand color light, and which allows to change the look and feel across all of the pages. The button style is a particular type. Down here I've got particular styling for a stack layout, different styling for a different styling for different stack layouts, but for a label here, there'll be styling for buttons, there'll be, for a label depending on where it is. Anyway, let me just get rid of that. The page itself is like this, a section here for each of the components. So this is the customer name there, and you'll notice the styling of the grid, the styling of the stack layout, and the styling of the label are all particular styles in order to get the similar look and feel. Bit painful. Now, what I've done is I've removed all of that styling. So there's a number of reasons why you do styling. One is because you want rounded buttons, and another reason is you want to make iOS and Android similar. I'll just get rid of that and uncomment this bit. And draw those. So what I'm doing here is, instead of all of those styles, I've just said put up a default entry with no styling. Now what I have done is, what I need to do is change this to material. I showed you before that I put visual equals material on the button in the first example. It's hierarchic, so it inherits down. So if I put it on the whole page, every control on this page will be visual. In fact, I put it on a tab page, which meant that every item on all of the tab page became a visual equals material. So if I just save that, so I get this look and feel. So with probably about 1/10 of the code, I get a very, very consistent look and feel. So the main differences between this and the previous one is the color of the buttons down the bottom, but this style of data entry field. So this is the Google style. So you may not like the Google style, I guess, is my point, but it is a very simple way of getting consistency across iOS and Android. This saves us a huge amount of work. So we're only starting to experiment with this. We haven't really used it in anger, and the project that we're currently working on, we are going to use this in anger because it saves us a huge amount of time fiddling around with how the screen and the format of the screen works and how can we get it consistent between iOS and Android. If you don't want consistency between iOS and Android, material design may not be for you, but this is good for us.
You know whether you can apply the material just to the Android side? So
Yes.
you have like on platform and then the Android side just use material on the iOS side that you don't want to use it.
So when you install Visual, actually I'll just go through the process of how you install, and that'll be answered obviously. So when Forms 3.6 came out, it came out with a modest 3 controls. There are all of these controls available now, and as the months go by, there'll be more and more controls. So this is, I'll post up this pack, but this guy, Dustin Catap, has done a really, really good blog on all of the different components, and he's got examples of all of these. To configure this, no, I'll come back. I'll go back to this. To turn material design on, you use the Xamarin Forms Visual material, so include that NuGet. And in your platforms, you say, so in app delegate, so in iOS, you say initialize. So to answer your question, if you don't want material in iOS, you just don't do that command. And then Android will have it and iOS won't have it. But there are other things that you might want to do. So I have done, yes. What you can do is that you can set individual features within the material design. So I have got, so what you might want to do is, you might not like the default font that Google have used, and so you can set your own font, and you can see there that they've actually said for Android, use a different font than on iOS. Now this one of the blogs that I've got a link to has got a whole suite of all of the different things that you can change. So if you don't like this, I haven't experimented with how far you can go. So I particularly don't like that data entry style or the squarish buttons. I like the rounder buttons. I don't know if you can go to that extent to change it here, but all is not lost. What Forms have done is they have created this interface called iVisual. And material design is an implementation of that. So I put visual equals material. I could have put visual equals custom, and I created a custom. So to do that, it's really quite simple. So in this particular example, before I move off here, this is actually Lachlan Gordon. So I suspect that when he came up and built, it was about the work that he was doing in the material design. So he helped me out a bit here. So this particular one is an iOS renderer that overrides the material button renderer and just sets the capitals equals null. Sorry, the uppercase title, he sets that to false. So you'll notice all the buttons were capitals. That's how he turns that off. And he's created a renderer that inherits from the button renderer. Sorry, the material renderer. Now to implement that, all I've done in my custom controls, I've created this thing called custom visual, and I've said custom visual inherits from iVisual. So that means that, now the naming convention is custom visual. I could have put there, and that would implement my own implementation of my own implementation of a visual that inherits and changes material design. So this gives me the ability to say to all of my programmers that if you do this and use custom visual, we can make all of our apps look exactly the same, and all you have to do is say use a button or use an entry field or use all of the controls that you want to use, and we will control how it all looks. Now I put custom visual there. You can quite easily just put custom, and that would do exactly the same thing. And you'll notice when I back on the example here, this custom visual is points to that custom visual that I just showed you in the demo. What will happen over time is that the Google material design will age. So I'm expecting that Google will come out with either enhancements to that or a new material. It might be a material 2 or a material light or whatever they want to call it. But because you can create your own visual, and anyone can, I'm expecting companies like Syncfusion and Telerik will come out with their own visual look and feel. So by setting their visual component or including their plugin, all of your controls will look in a consistent way across iOS and Android. Now, Kym just told me, I didn't realize, but Kym just told me that Microsoft are actually coming out with their version of material design or similar. Coming to the end of the presentation. So thanks. So David Ortino? So I didn't see his video that Kym was talking about, but he's got a really good blog. If you're going to learn visual material design, I would suggest you look at these links in this order, and you'll notice that the Material.io one, which is the definitive link, is down the bottom. It's not that, helpful. At the very top, David goes through exactly what I've shown you there. Really, how you implement the iVisual and how material design fits into that, and gives some examples about buttons similar to what I did. The second one is Dustin's. As I said, that's really quite extensive use or extensive examples of how to use all of the controls that were available earlier this month. He did that earlier this month, about 20 days ago, I think it was. Lachlan Gordon, he's got a really good example or a very simple implementation of overriding, or I call it inheriting from the material design. So that example of the the button. He's experimenting with that, and there were some really quite good, very simple examples there. And the last one, as I said, is the definitive website or blog, but it's too detailed. If you go through the other three, you'll get the hang of it really, really quite quickly. That's the end of the presentation. Do we have any questions?
Google publish that as open source? Like their NuGet package?
Their NuGet package is, I don't know if it's open source, but it's clear.
Can we see source?
I don't think so.
Are you talking about
The actual controls and how Google have done it. What Xamarin have done, what Microsoft have done, is they've asked Google for those, for the controls, and they've got them for iOS and Android. I don't know whether we get to see how those controls were created. I haven't seen anything to that effect.
Well, Google has a material library for iOS.
Does it?
Which is what I think we're exposing.
But the source code of that, is it exposed?
I don't know. I would guess it would be.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm expecting that extended library at some point to be merged into the Xamarin file.
What do you mean?
Material library. Because there was one NuGet package for material design.
So that Xamarin.forms.material.design, that's really an encapsulation of Google's controls, and but it won't change from what it is. It will stay the way that it is. It won't be. You don't want to include that if you're not going to use material. So you only want to include it as a NuGet if you want to use material. And my understanding, it creates the eye visual, and it's also got bundled in the Google material. So they may want to split them out into two NuGets.
Previous slide, the extended library.
That's.
What, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry. I'll repeat the question. So, previous slide.
Yeah, so you've got that exit material library from contracts. That's the third party. That's what they get.
Which one? Sorry,
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
No, this is just examples of using visual, material design. So this is grabbing each of the controls and giving you examples of the code that you would write to be able to include those controls and do things with them and what they look like. So it's here's a bit of code, here's what you get.
So it's a reference. It's not.
Correct. It's a reference. It's got some interesting stuff in there because it shows you how to modify the individual, how to change material design. It's got how to handle colours. It's got some pretty useful things in it. Sorry, AJ, I didn't understand your questions. Any other questions?
Wondering how technically difficult it is to write down at the lower end to write and implement a visual in a native.
So it's no more difficult, from what I can tell, no more difficult than writing your own custom renderers. So it's just a collection of custom renderers. That's all it is.
Interesting to see if you have a look at that code that you had on Dotnet. It's basically a renderer. You can see over on it says, okay, it's a button. Up the top one, the assembly reference, it says, hey, it's a button. The implementation of it is any case button renderer. The third thing is saying, this is of a visual type, custom visual. Right? So I could make Kym's visual, make it blue if I wanted to. Right? So that's sort of saying, this here, when I want to have a button, in any case button renderer, and my visual style is custom visual, this is the renderer that we use. So you're pretty much writing renderers.
The benefit is that you can just put a button, You don't have to remember that there's a custom renderer called any case button you're putting in. Like,
So-
I've done a whole heap of custom renderers in the past, a whole heap of styles. What's the benefit of this over doing it that way?
This
Do you want to turn your mic on?
I think that the difference here, right, and this is kind of weird because it's called any case button renderer, right? But let's say this was a button renderer, right? You could have a material button renderer. You could have a custom visual, right? And based on what your visual is set in XAML, it'll choose that renderer or that renderer.
Yeah, but within my XAML, I'm just putting button. Yeah, right. So
Okay, well, you're saying
I can change my visual much quickly rather than going through my code and changing all my element names.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you've got, the visual is set to the material of the page, can you change it on a specific element and say, my button, this one is going to be custom?
Yes, you can. So you can set the default. If you set your visual to ABC or something that doesn't exist, it will try and make it to ABC. It doesn't exist, so it'll go back to the default. I think that's how it works, because I've had that problem. The default is no visual, I believe. As in the default, like it is now. Yep. Yep. Any other questions?
Does it could it potentially create kind of weird effects that can't sort of otherwise fix?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm expecting not, because the technology of how it's doing it is pretty straightforward. It's not anything really that complicated. It's just that they've done it in a very neat way so that I can have custom renderers effectively for all the different controls with one command, rather than having to handle them separately. Now, no more questions, because I think there's pizzas out there. I'm happy to take questions out in the break. Make sure, everyone, the purpose of this is to network, so make sure you talk to someone if you haven't spoken to before. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rob.